The day I lost my 20-year job, I found a dream I'd buried and risked everything to chase it. It was a Tuesday evening in my cramped Brooklyn apartment, the kind of place where the walls seem to close in when the world falls apart. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from a pot I'd forgotten to turn off, and the only light came from the flickering glow of my laptop screen. There, in cold black letters, was the email that gutted me. Position eliminated due to restructuring. 20 years as an editor, 20 years of late nights and missed birthdays, and it all came down to 6 words. I sat there, frozen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard like they could somehow undo it. The hum of traffic outside, Brooklyn never sleeps, felt like a distant heartbeat mocking the silence inside me. I'd given everything to that publishing house. I'd proofread manuscripts until my eyes burned, fought for authors no one else believed in, and smiled through every corporate meeting that chipped away at my soul. And now, at 50, they discarded me like a book no one wanted to read. I pushed the laptop away and leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight. My apartment was a mess. Stacks of unopened mail, a half-eaten sandwich from lunch, and a thin layer of dust on every surface. It was the kind of chaos that creeps in when you're too busy surviving to live. My eyes drifted to the bookshelf in the corner, where a single item stood out, an old yellowed manuscript, its edges curled like it was ashamed to be seen. My manuscript. The novel I'd started in my 20s, back when I thought I could be a writer, back before life got in the way. I'd poured my heart into those pages, but when I became a single mom to Ethan, I buried that dream under diapers and bills. Now, it sat there, a ghost of who I used to be. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as they brushed the cover. The paper felt brittle, like it might crumble under my touch. I opened to the first page and the words hit me like a punch. She was never meant to fade. My own words mocking me. I wasn't just Sarah Thompson, the editor. I was Sarah, the dreamer, the woman who'd once believed she could tell stories that mattered. But somewhere along the way, I'd faded. Into a job, into a role, into a life I didn't recognize. The front door slammed, snapping me out of my thoughts. Ethan, my 16-year-old son, stormed in, his earbuds dangling like an afterthought. He barely looked at me, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his sneakers scuffing the hardwood floor. "Hey," I said, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. He grunted, heading for the kitchen. I tried again. "Ethan, can we talk? I got some news today." He stopped, turning just enough to show his profile, sharp jawline, dark hair falling into his eyes just like his father's. "What, Mom?" he said, his tone clipped. "You lose your job or something?" It was a jab, a teenager's careless sarcasm, but it landed like a blade. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Actually, yeah, I did." His eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed. "Great," he muttered, yanking open the fridge. "So what now? You gonna sit around all day? Everyone at school's gonna know my mom's unemployed." His voice dripped with disdain, and it cut deeper than the email. I wanted to scream, to tell him how hard I'd worked, how I'd sacrificed everything for him. But all I could do was stand there, my hands clenching the manuscript so tightly the pages crinkled. "Ethan, I'm trying," I said, my voice breaking. He didn't even turn around, just grabbed a soda and headed to his room. "Whatever, Mom, just get a normal job, okay?" The door slammed again, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. I sank onto the couch, the manuscript still in my hands, and let the tears come. They burned, not just for the job, but for the distance between me and my son, for the woman I'd let myself become. I don't know how long I sat there, the city's pulse thrumming outside, the streetlights casting jagged shadows through the blinds. But somewhere in that darkness, a spark flickered. Maybe it was the manuscript, its weight in my lap like a challenge. Maybe it was Ethan's words, sharp enough to wake me up. Or maybe it was just me, refusing to fade any longer. I stood by the window, the city's distant traffic a faint hum, my reflection lost in the darkness. "I'm going to take my life back," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. That night, I made a choice that scared me to death. I'd open a bookstore, a place for stories like the ones I used to dream of telling. and I'd finish that novel no matter what it took. Hey, before we go deeper into my story, I want to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments below. And if what I'm sharing hits home, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow, I've got something extra special lined up just for you. The manuscript was still open on my desk when the sun came up, its pages catching the pale Brooklyn dawn like they were daring me to follow through. I decided to open a bookstore and finish my novel, but as I stood there, the weight of that choice pressed down on me like the city itself. Was I crazy? At 50? Was I too old for this? The thought gnawed at me, but I pushed it down, focusing on the shop. The air in my apartment felt thick, heavy with the stale smell of yesterday's coffee and the faint tang of dust. Outside, the rumble of early morning traffic, delivery trucks and honking cabs reminded me that the world was moving on, whether I was ready or not. I pulled on a worn sweater, the wool scratching against my skin, and grabbed my notebook. If I was going to do this, I needed a place, a real bookstore, not just a fantasy. I stepped out into the crisp October air, the sidewalks of Brooklyn already buzzing with joggers and dog walkers. The street smelled of wet leaves and exhaust, and the light slanted through the brownstones, casting long shadows that seemed to point me forward. I walked for hours, peering into every empty storefront I could find. Most were too big, too expensive, or too far from the heart of the neighborhood. But then, on a quiet corner of Court Street, I saw it. A small, neglected shop with foggy glass windows and a faded for lease sign taped to the door. The brick facade was chipped, and the inside looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dusty shelves, cracked linoleum, the faint, musty smell of old wood. But when I pressed my face to the glass, I could see it. Rows of books, warm lighting, a place where stories could live again. My heart raced, a mix of fear and something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I called the landlord right there, my voice shaking as I left a voicemail. Then came the bank. Sitting in a sterile office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I pitched my idea to a loan officer who barely looked up from his computer. His tie was crooked, his coffee mug stained, and his questions were sharp. "Ms. Thompson, you have no business experience. What makes you think you can run a bookstore?" I gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles white, and told him about my years in publishing, my love for books, my need to build something for myself. He didn't smile, just slid a stack of forms across the desk. "We'll see," he said, his voice flat. I left with a pit in my stomach, the weight of those forms in my bag like a ticking clock. Back home, I tried to talk to Ethan. He was sprawled on the couch, scrolling on his phone, the blue light casting shadows across his face. The living room smelled faintly of the pizza we'd ordered last night, the box still open on the coffee table. "Ethan," I started, sitting across from him, "I found a place today, for a bookstore. I'm really doing this." He didn't look up, just snorted. His words came out low, bitter, like he'd been holding them in too long. "You're throwing away our savings for a bookstore? Nobody reads anymore, Mom. This is so stupid." I felt my chest tighten, like someone had squeezed the air out of me. I wanted to shake him, to make him see how much this meant, but his eyes were locked on that screen, shutting me out. "It's not stupid," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "It's for us, for our future." He rolled his eyes and stood, his sneakers squeaking as he walked away. "Whatever," he muttered, and his bedroom door clicked shut. I sat there alone, the silence swallowing me. My hands were trembling, not just from Ethan's words, but from the question they dragged up. What if he was right? What if I was risking everything, our home, our stability, for a dream that was already dead? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, and that's when I saw it on the coffee table, tucked under a pile of junk mail, a small framed photo of me and Ethan at the Brooklyn Public Library years ago. We were laughing, his tiny hand clutching a picture book, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows behind us, turning his hair golden. I picked it up, the glass cool against my fingers, and my throat tightened. Back then, I'd read to him every night, my voice weaving stories of adventure and magic. That was the Sarah I wanted to be again, not the one who faded, but the one who believed in possibilities. The bookstore was supposed to be my salvation, but as the opening day loomed, it felt more like a noose tightening around my neck. I stood in the middle of that little shop on Court Street, surrounded by half-empty shelves and cardboard boxes spilling over with books that hadn't arrived on time. The air was thick with the sharp smell of fresh paint and the musty tang of old wood, and my hands were streaked with white primer, my old jeans splattered like a bad abstract painting. The linoleum floor was cold under my sneakers, and the single bulb overhead flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. I'd been up since dawn, painting, unpacking, trying to make this place look like a dream instead of a disaster. But every brushstroke felt heavier, every box harder to lift. What if no one showed up? What if I'd gambled everything, my savings, my future, Ethan's future, on a fantasy that was already crumbling? I hadn't slept properly in weeks, my eyes burning from late nights spent wrestling with invoices and supplier emails. The bank had approved my loan, but barely, and the terms were brutal. Miss one payment, and I'd lose it all. I kept that fear locked deep inside, but it clawed at me, whispering that I was too old, too broken, to pull this off. I tried to talk to Ethan, hoping he'd see how hard I was fighting. He was in his room, as usual, the faint thump of music seeping through the door. I knocked, my knuckles hesitant against the chipped paint. "Ethan, can you help me at the shop today?" I called, my voice softer than I wanted. Silence. Then his voice, muffled and sharp. "I'm busy, Mom. Why don't you ask someone who cares?" The words landed like a slap, and I stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, fighting the urge to barge in and scream. Instead, I turned away, my throat tight, the hallway's dim light blurring through unshed tears. He was my son, my reason for everything, but he felt like a stranger now, and that hurt more than any bank loan ever could. Back at the shop, I was alone, the silence broken only by the occasional honk from the street outside. Brooklyn was alive, coffee shops buzzing, kids laughing on their way to school, but inside these walls, I felt like I was sinking. That's when Clara walked in. She was my neighbor, a retired teacher with a warm smile and gray curls that bounced when she laughed. She carried a thermos of coffee, the rich, nutty aroma cutting through the paint fumes. "This place is going to be special, Sarah," she said, her voice like a lifeline. She stayed for hours, helping me paint, her hands steady where mine shook. Her kindness was a spark in the dark, but it couldn't drown out the fear that kept me awake at night. What if I failed? What if Ethan was right, and this was all a mistake? The opening day came too fast. I'd barely slept, my body running on adrenaline and cheap coffee. The shop looked better. Shelves half-stocked, a small table with pastries, a handwritten "Grand Opening" sign taped to the door. I wore my best blouse, the blue one that used to make me feel confident, but it hung looser now, my frame worn down by stress. I stood behind the counter, my hands fidgeting, watching the clock tick closer to 10. The street outside was busy, but when I opened the door, the bell's chime rang once, then fell silent, its lonely echo mocking the empty room. A few people trickled in, an old man browsing mysteries, a young woman flipping through poetry, but they left without buying. By noon, the pastries were stale, and the shop felt like a tomb. I forced a smile, but inside I was unraveling. Had I been a fool to think anyone would care? Then the phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was the bank, their voice cold and clipped through the receiver. "Miss Thompson, your first payment is due next week. We need confirmation of your revenue stream." I gripped the counter, my nails digging into the wood, and mumbled something about projections. But when I hung up, the truth hit me. I had no revenue, no customers, no plan B. The shop was open, but it was failing, and the weight of that failure pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. I sank onto a stool, the room spinning, and wondered if I'd just thrown my life away. That night I stayed late, alone in the shop. The street outside was dark, the neon glow of a nearby diner casting faint stripes through the windows. I pulled out my manuscript, its pages worn from years of neglect, and started reading. The words were mine, raw and real, and for a moment they anchored me. I wasn't just a failed editor or a failing mother. I was a writer, And I still had a story to tell. I clung to that thought, my fingers tracing the ink, the paper cool against my skin. Then the door chimed. I looked up, startled, and there was Ethan. He stood in the doorway, his hoodie damp from the evening drizzle, his eyes avoiding mine. In his hand was one of my old books, a dog-eared copy of a novel I'd edited years ago. He didn't say anything, just held it out, his fingers tight around the spine. I stared at him, my heart pounding, not sure what it meant. Was he here to fight? To mock me again? Or was this something else, something I'd been too afraid to hope for? Ethan was here, but was it too late to fix things between us? Ethan's silhouette in the doorway, clutching that worn book, stayed with me all night. I didn't sleep, my mind replaying his quiet gesture, searching for meaning in the shadows of his averted eyes. Was it a peace offering, or just another fleeting moment before he shut me out again? The bookstore was my lifeline, but it was Ethan, my son, my heart, who kept me tethered to this fight. The next morning, I stood in the shop on Court Street, the air still sharp with paint and the faint sweetness of pastries left from the opening. Sunlight streamed through the foggy windows, catching specks of dust that danced like ghosts. The shelves, though sparse, held books I'd chosen with care, their spines a patchwork of colors against the white walls. I ran my fingers along them, the paper smooth under my touch, and felt a flicker of pride. This place was mine, even if it was hanging by a thread. Ethan showed up that afternoon, unannounced. I was restocking a shelf, my arms aching from lifting boxes, when the door chimed. He shuffled in, his hoodie damp from a light Brooklyn drizzle, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Thought you might need help," he mumbled, not meeting my gaze. My heart skipped, but I kept my voice steady. "Sure," I said, handing him a stack of paperbacks. "Start with these." He worked in silence, his movements stiff, like he was here out of duty, not desire. But he was here, and that was enough to make the air feel lighter, the shop less like a sinking ship. I watched him from the corner of my eye, his dark hair falling into his face, and remembered the boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story. Could I reach that boy again, or was he gone for good? At night, after the shop closed, I wrote. The apartment was quiet, Ethan in his room, the city's hum a low pulse outside. I sat at my desk, the laptop's blue glow harsh against the darkness, a cold coffee mug beside me. The manuscript was open, its pages marked with red ink, crossed out lines, scribbled notes, pieces of a story I was clawing back from oblivion. Every word felt like a battle, but also like a homecoming. I wasn't fading anymore. I was fighting. Weeks ago, I'd sent my manuscript to a local press, not expecting a reply, but hoping someone might see its worth. That hope kept me going as I organized a children's reading event, something small to draw people in. Clara helped spread the word, her warm laugh echoing as she handed out flyers on the street. On the day of the event, the shop was alive. Kids sprawled on a rug I'd bought secondhand, their parents sipping coffee, the air filled with the rustle of pages and soft giggles. I read from a picture book, my voice steady, and for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged. The sunlight poured through the windows, turning the room golden, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the inky scent of new books. A woman in the back, her glasses perched on her nose, approached me after. "I'm from a local press," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I heard you're a writer. Can I see your manuscript?" My breath caught, my hands trembling as I nodded. It was a chance, a real chance, and it lit a fire in me I thought had gone out. But Ethan wasn't ready to believe in me. That night, as we cleaned the shop, I told him about the publisher. He was sweeping, the broom scraping against the floor, and he stopped, his shoulders tense. "What if it doesn't work out, Mom?" he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "What if you put all this into the bookstore and your book and it all falls apart? We'll have nothing." His words were a knife, slicing through the fragile hope I'd built. I set down the cloth I was using to wipe the counter, my hands shaking, and looked at him. His eyes were stormy, not with anger, but with fear. Fear for me, for us. I wanted to hold him, to promise it would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know. "Ethan," I said, my voice cracking, "I have to try. If I don't, I'll never forgive myself." He shook his head, his jaw tight, and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The sound echoed in the empty shop, and I stood there, my chest hollow, wondering if I just lost him for good. The bookstore had become a heartbeat in the neighborhood. On Court Street, where the morning rush of coffee shops and bodegas never stopped, my little shop stood out, its windows now clear, the shelves brimming with books that told stories of love, loss, and redemption. The air inside was warm, scented with the inky tang of new pages and the faint sweetness of Clara's homemade cookies, which she brought every Saturday. Customers came regularly now, locals browsing for novels, kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, even a book club that met in the corner, their laughter spilling over like music. I'd watch them from behind the counter, my hands smoothing the wood I'd scrubbed clean, and feel a quiet pride. This wasn't just a shop. It was a home, a place I'd carved out of nothing. Ethan was there more often, too. He'd show up after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and help without being asked. He'd restock shelves, his movements surer now, or fix the wobbly table I'd bought secondhand. Once I caught him reading a sci-fi novel in the back, his brow furrowed and my heart swelled. He was still quiet, still guarded, but he was trying, and that was enough. We were rebuilding piece by piece like a book with torn pages being carefully taped back together. The biggest moment came when my novel was published. I could hardly believe it when the first copies arrived, their covers glossy, my name, Sarah Thompson, in bold letters across the front. I held one in my hands, the paper cool and smooth, and felt tears prick my eyes. This was the story I'd started in my 20s, the one I'd buried under years of doubt and sacrifice. Now it was real, alive, ready to be read. I planned a launch event at the bookstore, something simple but meaningful. Ethan helped me set up, stringing fairy lights across the shelves, their soft glow turning the shop into a constellation of warmth. The air smelled of fresh coffee and anticipation, and the chatter of early arrivals filled the space. Clara, the book club, neighbors who'd become friends. But just before the event, doubt came crashing back. I was arranging books on a display table, my hands unsteady, when the door chimed. A woman walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum, her perfume sharp and expensive. I recognized her instantly, Lydia, a former colleague from the publishing house, someone who'd always looked down on me. Her eyes swept the shop, her lips curling into a smirk. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you think you're a real author now? This little hobby of yours is cute, but don't kid yourself. You're not one of us." Her words were a blade, slicing through the confidence I'd fought so hard to build. I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the table, her smirk burning into me. The room seemed to shrink, the fairy lights blurring, the chatter fading to a dull hum. Was she right? Was I just playing pretend, a washed-up editor chasing a dream that didn't belong to me? I slipped into the back room, my breath shallow, and leaned against the wall, the plaster cool against my palms. My eyes landed on the small framed photo of me and Ethan at the library, tucked on a shelf between boxes. I picked it up, the glass smooth under my fingers, and stared at our faces, Ethan's tiny hand clutching a book, my smile wide and unafraid, the sunlight behind us turning the moment golden. That was why I'd started this, not for Lydia, not for the publishing world, but for him, for us, for the stories we'd shared and the ones I still had to tell. I closed my eyes, the memory steadying me, and whispered to myself, "This is why I kept going." If you're rooting for me, give this video a like. It helps us share more stories like mine. When I walked back out, the shop was full, the crowd spilling onto the sidewalk. Ethan was there, adjusting the lights, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet nod. I stepped to the center, my novel in my hands, and began to read. My voice was shaky at first, the words trembling like leaves in a storm, but as I spoke, they grew stronger, filling the room. The story poured out, a woman who'd lost herself but found her way back, just like me. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, the sound washing over me like a wave. I looked at Ethan, standing in the back, and he was clapping, his smile small but real. I walked to him, my heart full, and we hugged, his arms tight around me, the first real embrace in years. In that moment, I knew we'd made it. Not just the bookstore, not just the book, but us. Standing in the middle of my bookstore that night, with Ethan's arms around me and the crowd's applause still ringing in my ears, I felt something I hadn't in years, whole. The fairy lights twinkled above us, their soft glow painting the shelves in warmth, and the air carried the lingering scent of coffee and new books. I'd lost my job, my confidence, even my connection with my son, but here, in this shop on Court Street, I'd found my way back. As the last guests left, their voices fading into the Brooklyn night, I looked at Ethan, his smile faint but real, and knew we'd built something stronger than I'd ever dared to dream. But as I locked the door, the neon hum of the city outside, I couldn't help but wonder, was this victory permanent, or just a moment before the next challenge? Months passed, and Thompson's books became a heartbeat in the neighborhood. Every morning I'd unlock the door, the bell chiming brightly, and step into a space that felt like home. The shelves were full now, their spines a mosaic of colors, and the air was alive with the rustle of pages and the chatter of customers. Kids sprawled on the rug during story time, their giggles mixing with the clink of coffee mugs from parents. The book club met every Thursday, their debates spilling over into laughter, and Clara was always there, her gray curls bouncing as she restocked her famous cookies. I'd stand behind the counter, my hands smoothing the wood, and marvel at how this place, once a dusty dream, had grown into something real. The sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the room golden, and the faint smell of ink and wood polish wrapped around me like a promise kept. Ethan was part of it too. He'd come after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and take over the register or organize the kids' section. He was still quiet, still my teenage son with his guarded eyes, but there was a lightness to him now. Once I caught him helping a little girl find a book, his voice patient as he knelt beside her, and my heart swelled. We weren't perfect. There were still arguments, still moments when he'd shut his door and I'd feel that old distance. But we were learning to talk, to listen. One evening as we closed up, the streetlights casting long shadows through the windows, he looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." His voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the city, but it was enough to make my eyes sting. I reached for his hand, his fingers warm in mine, and squeezed. This was what I'd fought for, not just the bookstore, but us. I started writing again, too. In the early mornings, before the shop opened, I'd sit at my desk in the apartment, the first light of dawn creeping through the blinds. The air was cool, scented with the faint bitterness of coffee brewing, and my laptop hummed softly as I typed. My second novel was taking shape, its pages filling with a new story, one about a mother and son finding their way back to each other. The keys clicked under my fingers, each word a step forward, and I felt a quiet joy, like I was rediscovering a part of myself I'd thought was gone. The manuscript from my 20s had been my rebirth. This one was my future. The bookstore became more than a shop. It became a community. I started hosting events, author readings, poetry nights, even a workshop for aspiring writers. The room would fill with faces, some familiar, some new, their stories weaving together under the fairy lights. Brooklyn's pulse was in those moments. The honk of cabs outside, the laughter inside, the way the city seemed to hold its breath when someone shared a truth. I'd watch from the sidelines, my hands clasped, and feel a pride that went deeper than words. I'd been discarded at 50, told my story was over, but I'd proven them wrong. No matter how old you are, your story isn't over, not if you're willing to fight for it. One crisp morning I stood outside the shop, the air sharp with the promise of winter. The sign above the door, Thompson's Books, gleamed in the sunlight, its letters bold against the brick. I traced them with my eyes, the paint still fresh, and felt a surge of strength. I'd thought 50 was the end, but it was just the beginning. The street was waking up, bodegas opening, joggers passing, and I could hear the faint chime of the door as Ethan arrived to help. Whatever came next, new books, new challenges, new dreams, I was ready. Because this wasn't just a bookstore, it was my story, and I was still writing it.